Dear President Ghani, distinguished members of the delegation, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Körber Foundation, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you. Mr. President, we are really delighted to have you here in Germany today, but we are even more delighted to have you at Körber Foundation this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, President Ghani has described himself as an unshakable optimist. I believe that when you want to be a political leader without unshakable optimism, it's tough. But in times like these, it must be quite a challenge to even have a minimum of optimism. And that is true not only for Afghanistan. Some analysts have talked about the great unraveling. Some have talked about a new 30 years war, or some even about a third world war. One thing is certain. We are confronted with the collapse of order on multiple levels. And in combination with the renaissance of classical great power politics, this is an explosive mix. Ladies and gentlemen, the citizen in Wolfgang Goethe's Faust says, and I quote, "When in Turkey, far away, people one another better, you sit by the window, have a glass." End of quote. Well, clearly we cannot afford this attitude any longer. Today, Europe is directly affected by the conflicts in the arc of crisis stretching from the Mediterranean to the Hindu Kush. No man is an island, as the English writer John Donne famously put it more than 400 years ago. In a globalized and networked world, this is also true for countries and for continents. The influx of refugees to Europe, the threat of terrorism, both are proving every day the crisis of the wider Middle East and South Asia have become the crisis of the old continent. The tens of thousands of Afghan refugees who keep knocking on our door after a perilous journey to Europe give a face and a name to the crisis of their home country. They are a constant reminder that the stabilization of Afghanistan is not a mission accomplished, it is a work in progress. And not everybody is an unshakable optimist. A recent report drafted by the Federal Foreign Office here in Germany paints a bleak picture as it highlights the serious security problems in Afghanistan. Germany has borne a large share in the effort to help Afghanistan. Reconstruction aid, capacity building for government institutions and security forces, as well as military engagement. Today, Germany remains engaged in many ways, also within the framework of NATO's Resolute Support Mission, an important signal of continued support for Afghanistan and its people, and in line with Germany's security interests. Ladies and gentlemen, Körber Foundation's mission is to make a contribution to a better mutual understanding in international affairs. We stand for dialogue that helps to overcome political, national, and religious borders. We stand for an open and respectful discussion. Let's talk with each other rather than about each other, as our founder Kurt Körber put it more than 40 years ago. We are deeply convinced that this leitmotif is more relevant than ever because radio silence has never proven to be a very successful problem-solving strategy. Afghanistan and Germany's engagement in the Hindu Kush was again and again on our agenda over the past 10 years. We have published several books, set up roundtables, and hosted lively debates, for example, with Abdullah or with, most recently, Hamid Karzai. Mr. President, we are truly delighted and honored that you have accepted our invitation to share with us your view about the way ahead in your country, how to deal with the manifold problems which you have inherited, and the contributions Germany can make. And let me thank you in particular for your willingness to engage in an open exchange with us after your speech, and my colleague Nora Müller, who is the Executive Director, International Affairs of Körber Foundation, will moderate this debate. Last but not least, our discussion this afternoon could hardly be timelier. This year, we are celebrating 100 years of friendly relations between Germany and Afghanistan, which began in 1915 with the establishment of initial contacts between the governments of the German Reich and the Emirate of Afghanistan. And Mr. President, you just told me that your grandfather was the first ambassador of your country to Germany. Speaking of ambassadors, I would like to thank the Embassy of Afghanistan, above all Ambassador Hamid Siddiq, for the excellent cooperation, which we are looking forward to continuing in the future. And I would also like to extend a cordial thanks to Ambassador Markus Potzel, head of the German mission in Kabul, for his untiring support. Mr. President, may I now invite you to take the stage, please. Thank you very much.
In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, Dr. Paulsen, it's a great pleasure to be with you today and to be able to engage in a conversation. My sense of politics was formed by Max Weber's classic essay on politics as a vocation. Politics is a calling, not a profession. Politics is an obligation to the citizen and to the world, not an opportunity to rob the people blind. I hope that that formation translates into a sense of optimism that is grounded in very strict realism. So I'll begin with laying down the new normal, the threat, the word of threat, which we confront on a daily basis. Terror, morally reprehensible, it's become sociologically a system. We can no longer dismiss terror, narcotics, or human smuggling as sociological aberrations. There is an ecology that unites all these into a system. The global criminal economy is $1.7 trillion a year. And without understanding and confronting this global criminal economy, we are not going to face our critical problems. In this ecology, the bidding is provided by the criminal economy. That is the platform that enables terrorist financing and the smuggling of human beings. Every Afghan who comes to Europe spends $20,000 to $25,000. For everyone that makes it, 4 to 10 perish along the way or lose everything. This is not an organized movement the way the Germans went to the United States. You're familiar with moving out. Germans were among the very first people to see opportunity in the shores of North America. Wave after wave. I lived in Baltimore, which was a gateway of the Germans moving to the Ohio Plain and other parts. Irish. Every potato famine produced a wave out. Our globalism is focused on the freedom of the well-to-do, but restrictions to the poor. And we need to understand this profound inequality in order to be able to deal with it systematically. It is a joint problem. It is not either our problem or yours. What we need to understand that together we have a series of problems that need to be solved. Terrorism as an ecology is inhabited first by networks that are cross-national in composition. The world of the state is organized around hierarchies. The world of criminality is organized around networks. I'll come back to the morphology, but networks by definition, are fast and self-replicating, while states, even the best, are slow and deliberate, which makes them respond to the needs and aspirations of the citizens, but otherwise cooperation between states is a fundamental problem. The second thing, you spoke of forms of order. But we live, particularly in our part of the world, with absence of rules of the game between states. The ecology of terror is made possible both by terrorists, but also by indifference of states and by the willingness of some states in the past to use malign state actors as instruments of policy. As long as some states differentiate between good and bad terrorists, all the state system is going to be in peril. So getting the rules of the game right is fundamental. Acheson famously observed in Present at Creation that at that time, in the world of post-45, they got half the word right. And we've been dealing with the legacy of not getting the other half right. Second, terrorism is acquired a morphology, as is criminality in general, as is movements of violence. The morphology is that they are very fast changing. It took Al-Qaeda 20 years to move from planning to its heinous attack on the World Trade Centers, with trials along the way in Kenya, in Yemen. But Daesh moved from conception to execution within 4 years. In terms of network theory, and there's been some very substantial analysis, open source, that I commend to everybody. It's been done by CENTCOM. Daesh's formation passes 5 to 6 stages of network theory formation. This is a morphology of constant change. And in this world, cyber is become critical. We are not dealing with face-to-face communities of terror. We are not dealing with classic hierarchies. We are dealing with fast replicating movements that are recruiting through the internet, that forms of action that replicate and create the ground. So unless we understand the enemy and the threat that we are dealing with, our response will be partial. With apologies to Microsoft, if Al-Qaeda was version 1, Daesh is version 6. And we need to be prepared for version 6 and 8 and 9. I think Moore's law, that half-time of innovation is repeatedly halved, is now applying to these networks of violence. And again, by contrast, first understanding of the phenomena is fragmented. Intelligence is organized around countries. Sharing of a common vocabulary regarding threats is still absent. And much more fundamental than the initial understanding, of course, common frameworks of action as to whether the threat is short-term, medium-term, or long-term, or combination is still in search of an answer. But the third aspect is the pathology. You've seen the recent news. Istanbul, the Russian plane in Sharm el-Sheikh, Beirut, Paris, Mali, and unfortunately, the list could go on. What is characteristic here is that the pathology is directed towards producing news. The narrative of the news cycle is now set by the action of terrorists. Which day has it been in the past months that the news has not been dominated by these networks? That they have not set the terms of the coverage. The counter-narrative is weak. It's there, but it's manifested in action in an unusual set of policies, not in a coherent narrative that previous struggles have enabled us to deal with. So in this kind of pathology, who's the object? And what's been the goal? First, our freedom of movement. The tourist industry has been hit in the past months because freedom of movement for tourism has been one of the fundamentals of freedom of movement. But second, the trust between the state and citizen is the key objective. Can you imagine people in Paris looking over their shoulders constantly to watch where the next threat is coming? New York of 1970s, where I lived, that was quite common. But Paris of 2015, no. And in between, of course, is the most fundamental of social contracts that is under attack. The trust of the citizen that state institutions will protect them, will guarantee the freedoms that have become routine. So as a result, the randomness is actually ordered. And it needs reflection and our ability to deal with it. So I hope that I've delineated the key issues of threat, and within this, the crisis of refugees, again, is related both to lack of certainty, and the criminality that underwrites this. Why is it that narcotics travels through well-ordered governments? Why is it that there is no fundamental focus on dealing with the root causes of narcotics and its elimination? Is it time that the habits of the middle class in some wealthy countries need to change so that we can deal with the root causes of this criminality and at other aspects of this criminality, as well as finance? The world of finance is highly criminalized. It takes one transaction for black money to move then to the cycle of global finance. We have a comprehensive threat, and it requires comprehensive understanding and measures to deal with. But let me next turn to the opportunities, because if my job is described probably as one of the two most difficult jobs on earth, and I don't know how close the competitor is, but it's a job very much well doing, because the fate of 30 million people depends on it. And I'm very proud of the Afghan public who've engaged in one of the most democratic conversations and are continuing to engage in a democratic conversation. We're a resilient people. Anyone else in our position today would have abandoned everything. Yes, some of us are moving, but what needs to be remarked upon is for 30,000 that have left, there are 30 million that are determined to stay. We have faced one of the most brutal attacks in the last 40 years in 2015. An all-out war was declared against us. It has gone through 7 phases. If in conversation there was interest, I could describe it to you. What was the strategic objective? The strategic objective was to create 2 political geographies in Afghanistan and then force us into a humiliating peace deal. Most analysts last year, when we faced our triple transition simultaneously, the political transition, the security transition, and the economic transition, were not giving us any chance. Today, our armed forces, our security and defense forces, have stood their ground. Yes, we've paid a very high price, but it's the price of patriotism. And I'm very proud to have been functioning as the commander-in-chief. The last thing I wanted, given my formation, which is social theory and citizenship, was to be forced into the role of commander-in-chief, but I've played it proudly. And am very proud that our forces are standing. And in this regard, let me pay first tribute to the 54 Germans who paid the highest price in helping us create the institutions that today are able to cope with the departure of 130,000 NATO ISAF troops and stand their ground. And second, let me thank Germany for its remarkable leadership this year. I'm very grateful to Chancellor Merkel for not only Germany's contribution, but for partnering with us to persuade the rest of our partners, including a very cogent argument to President Obama that Afghanistan was worth investing in and continued supporting. German support from civil society, from foundations, from political parties, and particularly from the government, has been highly welcome in our 100 years, I hope, will continue for centuries. But the larger world of opportunities. First, Asia is transforming from a geographical notion into a continental economy. Afghanistan is in the middle of 4 billion consumers. And when you look at the map, all routes in the past for Asian trade, pilgrimage, and yes, at times conquest, have led through Afghanistan. Our location, which for 200 years was a phenomenal deficit, is in the next 25 years going to become one of the most important assets in the region. Our vision, and it's not just empty vision, is to become the hub for a series of connectivities. The first project, taking energy from Kyrgyzstan onto Tajikistan, then to Afghanistan and Pakistan, is already underway. We've raised $1 billion for it, and it's soon going to be implemented. The Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline on 13th of December, ground-laying ceremony is going to take place in Ashgabat. It's moving from theory to practice. Turkmen Railway is going to reach our border in February, transmission lines. So what is really significant is to see this space that was a cul-de-sac into a roundabout. Roundabout are places where ideas, people, and goods move freely and flow. The networks of violence need to be confronted by networks of virtue. And that's the possibility that is on offer. Second, the fundamental question is always asked, will Afghanistan be able to afford statehood in financial terms? Because today, of course, the overwhelming set of resources that underwrite statehood is derived from foreign aid. And the world is tired, exhausted with the syndrome of foreign aid, particularly when foreign aid is not effective. 1/3 of our geography that has been documented to date is worth between $1 and $3 trillion. In the next 20 years, we will become the largest producer of copper and the largest producer of iron in the world. We will become a significant player in the gold market. We have 14 of the 17 rare earth material, and most geologists describe us as the Saudi Arabia of lithium. That gives us a very different set of connectivities. And in terms of environment, we have the headwaters. Except for China, every single one of our neighbors depends on us as the upper riparian. In the next 10 years, with 2 degrees of global warming, our water is going to be as valuable, if not more valuable, than the oil of our neighbors. But the most fundamental asset that gives me hope are our people. So some of the characteristics of the people, and then I can conclude. I stay within your 15 minutes, Ms. Miller. I'm very disciplined. The indirect impact of my grandfather being exposed to German education is paid. I'm always on time, and hopefully. Our people have several characteristics. First is, we are not a nation of beggars. You don't find Afghans begging on the streets. We interact, we trade, we take our destiny in our hands. But our dignity has been fundamental to our resilience. Second, we are young people. We are in ancient land, but inhabited by very young people. 70% of our people is below 35. Every day, every month, we become younger. Only 3% of our population is above 60. And we have three majorities that are numerical majorities, but political economic minorities. Women. Women probably are a numerical majority because we lost 1.5 million people defending our freedom against the former Soviet Union, and the majority of them were men. And naturally, there are 104 women born to 100 men. Empowerment of women is critical, and the change in our women in positions of leadership is enormous. I had 2 years ago, it was taboo to talk about a woman being on the Supreme Court of Afghanistan. I had the honor of nominating the first woman to the Supreme Court of Afghanistan, and she lost only by 9 votes, and it was the fault of women deputies who were not present all there. So next conversation next year is going to be very much about women being present to make those changes. The second is the youth. Our youth is the majority. Again, both men and women. But the question of empowerment of the youth is the critical issue. Here, I want to thank GIZ for an enormously constructive set of studies and for indicating there's a remarkable German in Afghanistan who spent 5 years studying vocational schooling. And I had 3 hours of fascinating conversations after I read the 6 papers. He thinks we can get vocational education right. And if we get vocational education right, illegal migration will turn to legal migration to the Gulf and North Asia. The demography of migration needs our understanding. The Gulf needs legal migrants. In East Asia, Northeast Asia is having the demographic transition. We should not give way to fear regarding this. This is a phenomena that can be dealt with systematically. The pull and push factors need to be dealt with, and again, I'm sure you'll have questions, so I don't want to elaborate. And the last, and the key group, of course, are the poor. 36% of our population lives below the $1.25 of the World Bank. But if you change the poverty line to $2, it would go to 70%. I'm describing these to describe to you what the legacy is that our government of national unity has received. But precisely because we know what is the legacy, now we are determined to overcome it. And in this regard, our key issue, of course, is to overcome the ineffectiveness of the government, the pervasive corruption of the past, the pervasive lack of accountability. What becomes key to responsibility is to own the problem ourselves. What is shifted from before, and we are very proud of the conversations that we have had since my inauguration, the formation of the government of national unity, is that we Afghans own our problems, define them, and define the solutions. And in this regard, you have partners in Afghanistan that are willing to tackle all the issues, whether it's counterterrorism, whether it's counter-narcotics, whether it's illegal migration, in a systematic, coherent manner, so we know what the dimensions of the problem are, how we relate to each other, and particularly how we create the grounds for partnerships that are not reactive but proactive. Because if I'm correct from the analysis that I've presented to you, our problems are medium term, and the solutions need to be matching short-term, medium-term, and long-term actions in a systematic framework. Thank you again for the opportunity. I look very much forward to the conversation.
Mr. President, thank you very much for this very intriguing and very dense statement. I would say 50% of what we heard was President Ghani and 50% was Professor Ghani. So let me start with the first point you mentioned. You talked about the morphology, the ecology, and the pathology of terrorism. Now, in Afghanistan, we also see, in its infancy, I would say, cells of Daesh or ISIL, but it seems to me that this movement is gaining ground in your country as well. You talked about the ISIL type of terrorism as terrorism 6.0, so I wonder, what kind of a potential do you see for Daesh in your country? And you hinted already to some of the strategies, finding a potent counter-narrative and all of that, but maybe you could a little bit elaborate on the counter-strategies.
Sure. Well, thank you. First, in the Munich Security Conference, I coined these terms, and then I warned about Daesh. And you know what was the reaction? There goes Ashraf Ghani trying to raise money for his country. We need to understand that those of us who are on the edge and are in the front line need to be part of the equal conversation. Intelligence analysts, one after another, have gotten the picture of terrorism wrong. This requires a serious conversation, and that's what I'm asking, where all of us put together the information and our understanding and our sense. Our national security agencies and our national intelligence agencies need fundamental change. Second, in terms of Daesh, they have what is called organizing, orienting, deciding, and acting, ODA. These have been very well documented for Iraq and for Syria. The other part that needs to be appreciated about Daesh, its command and control is organized from the bureaucracy of the Baathis. These are not amateurs. As a result, we identified the phases, and before they got to acting, we hit them. Daesh would have been a lot more potent in Afghanistan had the government of Afghanistan not decided in a series of special force operations to hit them. But if then the war that was imposed on us, and I brought it to you, forced us to deal with a series of changing scenes, because unlike the past, northern Afghanistan and northeastern Afghanistan became subjects. And we were stretched. Within this stretch, Daesh was able to make its presence felt. Today, there are two areas. One is in the province of Zabul, where they engaged in one of the most inhumane acts, cutting the head of a young girl and killing others that they'd taken hostage. Second is in the province of Ningar along the Durand line, where they've made people literally sit on bombs and blow them. But the reaction of the Afghan public has been enormous. In response to the killings, senseless killings in Zabul, there were demonstrations across the country asking for unity and focus. It is part of a threat, equally in Ningar. Today, they are in retreat. But given the morphology that we've spoken about, we really need to be vigilant and not declare victory too soon, because this is a type of threat against which declaring victory soon could be costly.
Let me follow up here, Mr. President. Does Daesh capitalize on the strange situation that the Taliban finds itself in at the moment? I mean, just yesterday we heard this report about Mullah Mansour being shot and severely injured in this shooting somewhere in the vicinity of Quetta, apparently as a consequence of infighting within the Taliban. And you yourself said there is no such thing as the Taliban anymore, if at all there was. So do you think that this kind of dynamics is in Daesh's favor in your country? This is one. And secondly, how does the situation of the Taliban affect, the inner Afghan peace process, if you will?
Sure. The first issue, Daesh, that's why we need to have a word ecology. Daesh both competes and cooperates with other groups. It's a man-eater. Who were its first targets? Its competitors in Iraq and Syria. It literally swallowed them. And how did it swallow them? By fear. By injecting fear, by systematically destroying their ranks and their leadership. So in part, that is what it is attempting today with the Taliban. Second, there's a large reserve army of labor. Thousands of people were trained during the Soviet period, and they've been trained subsequently. We should deal with the root issue and not with the manifestation. Taliban is but one manifestation of the disorder that afflicts us. What's the fundamental issue? We've put the problem to Pakistan and to the world. Pakistan has been in an undeclared state of hostilities with Afghanistan for the past 14 years, some will say 40 years. Unless we get peace, the fundamental peace for us is peace between the sovereign state of Afghanistan with the sovereign state of Pakistan. Because until the period that any states in the region provide sanctuary, allow for financing, and allow for recruitment, whether overt or covert, new phenomena can be produced. Now, and specifically with the Taliban, the conflict today has three dimensions. It's a three-dimensional war. The first is the rejects of other countries. I was in Russia with President Putin and President Xi and others for BRICS and for Shanghai. And some of the statements were in vague terms, Afghanistan is a source of danger. And I've asked a very simple question. Where do the majority of the terrorists come from? They come from China, they come from Russia, they come from Tajikistan, they come from Uzbekistan, they come from Saudi Arabia, they come from Egypt, and particularly from Pakistan. Where are Afghans as terrorists in other countries? Please point out to me. Yes, there are Afghan suicide bombers, but they are blowing other Afghans, unfortunately. They are not part of this. So this dimension needs to be dealt with, Madam Müller, because it's unprecedented. None of these people can be put in the framework of insurgency. They are not about taking power in Afghanistan, but there is no precedent for dealing with them. The closest is FARC in Colombia that provided third country settlement. The second, Taliban now is not just an Afghan phenomenon. There are probably numerically more Pakistani Taliban than Afghan Taliban. And there, the Pakistani state has declared them to be terrorists. It's amended its constitution, it's amended its Army Act. How do we deal with this, which is a cross-boundary, cross-frontier phenomenon? And the third is relation between two states. In this regard, the primary piece from our judgment is to make sure that the government of Pakistan engages with us fundamentally regarding the commonality of threat. And then we can forge. And in vis-a-vis Taliban, there is no such thing as that Taliban. There are groups of them and competition among them. They're fighting in various places. We will not comment on an event that is not confirmed, but it is important to understand that there are inner struggles, and it's important to recognize as to what are the outcomes regarding peace. The fundamental issue is that the sacrifices, both yours and ours, because we've been partners in this. The first and second chapter of the Constitution of Afghanistan are not for negotiation. Our women cannot go back to apartheid. The equal rights of citizens of Afghanistan cannot be compromised. I will never enter into a sort of peace that is going to be the shame of history. It needs to be a peace that is within our constitutional terms and guarantees the future of our citizens. But we recognize that we have a fundamental issue, and we would like the Taliban to be converted into a political movement, a legitimate political movement, and if the people of Afghanistan then vote for them, fantastic. But most likely they will not vote for it.
We'll take you on your word, Mr. President. Before I open this to our guests, let me just ask a very brief final question. I wanted to ask you about A, Pakistan, and B, the domestic political dynamics in your country. So what I'll do is I'll just squeeze this into one question. So the question is like this. Who is the tougher nut to crack from your point of view? Is it Dr. Abdullah Abdullah or the Pakistani military?
Dr. Abdullah Abdullah is a partner, a friend, a brother. I'm delighted to work with him. There is no nut to crack. We work together. Hegel famously said, to analyze a nut, you have to break it. That applies to the Pakistani military. We have to analyze it to be able to engage with it.
Mr. President, thank you so much. Now it's the time to open up our conversation for a Q&A with our guests. It seemed to me that I already saw some raised hands. If the ladies and gentlemen who already wanted to pose a question could raise their hands once again. I see Matthias Gebauer.
Do you want me to stand or do you want me to sit?
No,
okay.
Please remain seated.
Thank you.
But you could
Mr.
stand
President, my name is Matthias Gebauer. I work for Der Spiegel here from Germany, the German magazine. Mr. President, I have one question because you claimed that most of the Afghans, you spoke about 30 million, would like to stay in your country. I'm just wondering, how do you want to convince your people in Afghanistan to stay in your country when most of your government staff, including ministers and vice president, bring their families to foreign countries because they think it's not safe anymore in your own country?
Sure. An excellent question. Our ministers are a product of diaspora. They were given asylum in 1980s and 1990s. You need to recognize this is not a word of villages. When I go to Afghan villages, I ask two questions. How many of you have been abroad? And usually it's about 60%. How many of you have relatives abroad? That's another 40%. Afghanistan is not a cul-de-sac of the past. You need to understand that over 5 million people have returned to Afghanistan in the last 14 years. But we have a set of connectivities. We have 5 million refugees today in Iran, in Pakistan. The question of commitment is going to come with a sense of sacrifice. Increasingly, there are people who are coming to key positions of leadership who do not have these diaspora connections. But it would be foolish for me to say that that is not part of our makeup. In 2001, when I returned after 25 years of exile, among the first to return, Kabul was less than 400,000. Minimally, it's today 3.5 million people. I was going to the province of Logar in Paktia, and I saw onions. This is in January of 2002. They were packed, and I asked, why are they packed, where are they going? They were being sent to Peshawar. Kabul did not have enough purchasing power to buy the onions produced within a kilometer of it. Today, Afghanistan has changed, but is it finished? It is a work in progress. And again, let me repeat, the absolute majority of the Afghans want nothing else but a stable and prosperous Afghanistan. And what we ask for you is a partnership to deal with the dimensions of the problem and to make sure that we have your support regarding rules of the game in the region, that a stable framework can be created where we can create the prosperity that would make people stay. Did not a lot of Germans go to the United States after World War I and World War II? Did they not have families abroad? Did they not have connectivities abroad? Did you not lose your best of scientists to the United States or to England? Let us understand, this is not, Afghanistan is not unique. The world has faced these, but the same people and their children returned. Look at the Irish diaspora that returned. Look at the Indian diaspora and the Chinese diaspora. They are now part of the phenomenal dynamic of growth of these three countries, and we hope to achieve the same.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, while we're discussing here in this room, there is a very intensive debate going on Twitter. And I have one question here from Twitter posed by Zebulon Karlander. And he says, or he asks, in what areas do you see most potential for EU-Afghan cooperation, Mr. President?
Sure. The first issue is environment. This will surprise you. Our potential for renewable energy is the remarkable 316,000 megawatts of power. Dr. Humayun Qayyumi, sitting here, is my chief advisor on infrastructure and education. Until some months back, he was president of San Jose University in California, and won last year the Silicon Engineer of the Year award. Only 12 individuals in the world have been granted this honor. He resigned to come back. The traffic is both ways. And because of this, in the last 70 years, Afghanistan has produced 234 megawatts. Thanks to that, Dr. Qayyumi's and our Minister Usmani's leadership, next year we are going to produce 240 megawatts of power. Getting energy is the frontier. What I argued in Paris, and I would like to repeat here, don't treat the least developed countries, we are the fourth poorest country on earth, as cases of charity. These have to be the frontiers of innovation. Backwardness is an advantage because you're not paying the cost of restructuring. Second is trade. We're opening up the Lapis Lazuli road to Europe. This is going through Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey. Europe would be within 5 to 7 days. People are difficult. Europe is changed fundamentally and wants to close in on itself. But products, I'm asking German importers in Hamburg and the rest, because Hamburg is the gateway to Europe, work with us with value chains to develop the value chains where Afghan products come. There's endless stock of women's empowerment. I've been asking for 14 years a series of supermarket chains to join us in producing a label called Made by Afghan Women. Afghan women become actors legally empowered when they have money in their pockets. So on all the fund, and education. Education is fundamental. In terms of quantity, we've achieved a lot of results, but quality is extraordinarily poor. So there is a range of areas, and the most fundamental issue with Europe is a partnership of values so democratic institutions can be consolidated, where citizenship rights and obligations are clear. And in this part, I'm very grateful to both President Tusk and Chairman and Foreign Policy Leader Mogherini. In October, there's going to be a conference in Brussels in support of Afghanistan, and let's put all the key issues on discussion so that a true partnership of value with a medium-term horizon can develop.
Mr. President, I see that your chief of protocol is still very relaxed, so could we take one more question?
Absolutely.
Good. Almut Wilan-Karimi.
My chief of protocol is used to town hall meetings in Afghanistan. I was in Kunduz on Thursday, and my speech was interrupted 10 times by other speeches.
So we're on the safe side here.
Mr. President, it gave me great pleasure to listen to your profound analysis on Afghanistan and the situation in Afghanistan. It's good news for you that you're getting younger by the day, while we are getting older by the day.
My
unfortunately...
people, not me. I wish it was true of me too.
It's good you made this
So they've elected an old man to represent young people.
It's good we have this clarification. And I just wanted to ask you, because you said you are very optimistic, and you have about half a million young people coming out of school every year in Afghanistan. What concrete reforms and projects do you have to give them a perspective in Afghanistan?
Sure. Well, thank you for a fantastic question. What we've focused on is last year, let me give you half a minute of background. We inherited a deep recession bordering on a depression. And the reason was that ISAF NATO was not just a military security actor. 130,000 troops plus around 450,000 contractors were the largest consumers. And it completely changed the economy. So we suddenly lost about a consuming force of 600,000. And its impact on sectors was profound. And yet, because the past Afghan government did not have credibility with the IMF, and IMF became our key interlocutor, we had to impose austerity. We are coming out of the austerity. We have fulfilled all our obligations to IMF, including raising the revenue. For the first time, Mr. Hakimi needs to be congratulated, we're meeting our revenue targets on the way. Now, our key focus is a stimulus package called Jobs for Peace. We are embarking on a very intense program. First, we import, believe it or not, this is shocking, $4 billion worth of foodstuff a year. Afghanistan's agriculture now is land under coverage. Only two-thirds of the land that was cultivated in 1978 is under cultivation. So our goal in the next 5 years is to become self-reliant on food. 21 dams are going to immediately move to construction so that water management becomes the key issue. Agriculture declined to about 30%, but 70% roughly of the population lives on it. So 2 to 3 million jobs can be created in agriculture. Getting agriculture right is not just for dignity, it is absolutely essential for stability. Without getting agriculture right, we cannot get stability right. The second thing is transit. Afghanistan will become our destiny again, is to become this Asian roundabout. So the transit agreements that we are negotiating and opening up, because the service sector is 40% in transport-related sectors. The third area is housing. We've started the first partnership with the Chinese of 10,000 affordable homes, but our goal is 100,000 of these homes. Urban renewal is part of this. We have an extensive package and would be delighted to share the details with you, both for your comments and for the support that we need. And the mining sector, we needed to take a pause because we were developing the full syndromes of the curse of the planting. If you get mining wrong, you become Congo. If you get mining right, you become Norway or Chile. Norway is beyond our grasp institutionally because the corruption that we've inherited needs to be dealt with. So we made a very deliberate choice to deal with the key drivers of corruption and contain them so we could then create. Mining, unfortunately, will not create jobs, but it will create the revenue in the bases that would enable us to move forward.
Once again, I look at your Chief of Protocol, Mr. President, because there are 2 more questions.
When do I see Minister Müller? Oh, okay. He says 5 minutes. You have to look at the ambassador.
So what does the ambassador say? 1 more question is okay, Excellency?
Sure.
Okay. So this young lady over here.
Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon to everyone. And a very warm welcome to Mr. President and distinguished colleagues to Berlin. I'm Mariam Sanjush, one of the Afghan students in Berlin at the field of public policy at the Hertie School of Governance. And I would like to appreciate your achievements and what you have done so far during the political, economic, and security transition for the past years. And also, I would like to appreciate as an Afghan the definition of Afghan problem, not only Afghan problem, but the region. And also, I would like to appreciate your I'm sorry, I'm very much...
Say it in German.
I would like to very much appreciate for introducing women at the Supreme Court, and also for giving more spots for women at your cabinet. However, it doesn't define that the situation of women has changed and we are going at the positive direction. Rather, we are going at the negative direction, and the situation of women in Afghanistan is getting worse day by day. I would like to know your agenda and your plan for the women empowerment in Afghanistan in the short term. And also, I would like to ask a question that during the last year, there is a gap has been created between the public and the government. So how do you define this, and how is your explanation about this, and what's your plan? Also, I would like to know your message for the Afghan, young, educated Afghan women studying here like me. Thank you very much.
Of course.
And with this, we extend the duration of this event by another hour or so, Mr. President.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for studying. Please explore the word. Please question all received wisdom, because that's what Dr. Qayyum and I did, and it has given us still this ability to both engage in a conversation and to listen very carefully. So it's a wonderful opportunity, and enjoy Berlin. Don't just study. Explore the museums, explore the other parts. The future for women like you is to become leaders. And the future for all people, I see myself as a bridge over which the young people of Afghanistan are going to cross first to management and into leadership. I don't have a political family. I don't belong to any section of Afghanistan. I belong to all of Afghans. And it's absolutely essential. Every day, what I think about most is what kind of an inheritance do I leave for my successor? Because that is going to be the test of sustainability. Whatever one achieves that depends on one's continued role in that function is not sustainable. So one has to overcome arrogance and be focused on a historical process in which we are catalysts, not determinants. So strict adherence to the Constitution is absolutely essential, because the Constitution is our greatest gift and our greatest asset. In terms of the gap has come from expectations. Our people expected peace. Our people expected prosperity and an ability to see change directions. The disappointments have come, and they're very justified, because we've had to fight for our survival. Explaining to people that we are fighting for our survival is extraordinarily difficult. Because the greatest, today one of our colleagues was saying, after oxygen, the greatest need of Afghans is peace. But a peace, there's a choice. Do we make a peace that is the mother of all future conflicts, or do we make a peace that is really sustainable and the platform for future? This has been the struggle. I had to choose between being president and being commander-in-chief. And being forced to being commander-in-chief, some of the functions that need to be performed by the president have not received as much attention. One of those areas, for instance, is human capital. I'd love as a teacher, as a continuous student and teacher, to spend a lot more time on primary education or on girls' education, but time has simply not been available. So it is fundamental that we engage. Third, in your most fundamental question, in terms of women. One reason we know what's going on is because today we have a much better view of the picture. 1325, the UN commitment in the plan that we've prepared for Resolution 1325 is one of the fundamental areas. In here, we need to focus on the immediate issues. First, women dying at childbirth. The rates have been halved in the last 14 years. When I was finance minister, I had the privilege of putting the health program, but they are horrible. And dealing with women's health issues is fundamental. Our demography, rate of birth, is reaching almost 5.1 births per woman. You don't need war to have unsustainability. We need to build on the very successful experience of Iran and Bangladesh to launch a full understanding of family planning. This is not happened yet. It is imperative. Second is education. Women have participated, and in general, all the data shows that women's schools are better run than boys' schools. But the quality of education, particularly primary and secondary education, is a phenomenal problem. At 12 years old, women stops going to school. And one reason, simplicity itself, but it's not received attention, is lack of latrines. Then, boys are allowed to walk 2 hours to school. Girls are not allowed to walk 2 hours to school. We need to be able to deal with it. And one of the most important issues in this regard is to get fiber optics to the mosques and schools. We have to reach our women in multiple ways so that the education of quality. Then each of these phases, 12-year-old, 16-year-old, 18-year-old, obstacles, fundamental obstacles develop towards their further participation. And today we also have, unfortunately in some areas of the country, like Shignan in Badakhshan, highly educated women who cannot find jobs because the job structure was part of the patronage machine. Legal empowerment is fundamental, but legal empowerment also requires a social cultural change of profound dimensions because law has to be enforced. But the most significant issue, and that's what we are going to focus, women in Islam, and in Afghan women, I've written the past history of the last 15 years, 500 years, have always had the right to property. But today, property has become a domain of contestation because 16,500 individuals robbed millions of hectares of land and seized them. Now we are trying to reverse it. All our programs now will focus on giving property rights to men and women simultaneously, not just registering in the name. But without an economic empowerment program, women work 12 to 16 hours a day. You ask their children what your mothers do, they say they're unemployed. Let me see somebody who's described as unemployed that works 14 to 16 hours. But the work is not paid. Women's labor needs to become linked to the market. The greatest connectivity now that Afghan women need are market-based sets of relationships. It's not just the weakness of the state. It is the fundamental weakness of market institutions to reach our women, and that's, again, where we need some of our feminist colleagues to put their connections to create the enabling things of bringing us the right partners globally that we can achieve those results.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, we're at the end of 60 plus, I would say, very interesting and intriguing minutes. Mr. President, thank you so much for being with us, for
Pleasure.
taking the time and for sharing your very interesting analyses with us. We wish you, of course, the best of success for what is probably one of the toughest jobs one could imagine. Thomas Paulsen talked about your unshakable optimism, so keep up the spirit. Winston Churchill once said that a pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity, and the optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. So on this note, we wish you a lot of opportunities. We do look forward to continuing this conversation. So once again, thank you very much. And if you, ladies and gentlemen, feel like staying with us for a cup of coffee or a glass of wine and continue talking about Afghanistan, you're most cordially invited. There will be a reception outside. And with this, thank you again very much.
You think I'm an optimist? Look at my family history. In the last 600 years, every generation, my family has lost everything. And yet we stand. So resilience.
Resilience is the word. Thank you very much.